Well, good morning to my grandchildren. It's another beautiful day here. It's raining outside, but it is a pretty day. And we don't have to worry about God watering the crops because He's sure doing that. Well, if you remember in our storybook, Charlotte's Web, last time we read about where Charlotte wrote in a web, "Some pig," and that was above Wilbur's pig pen. And quite a commotion was stirred, and everybody wanted to come and see the pig. But now things have kind of died down a little bit, and Charlotte had a meeting with all the farm friends there in the bottom of the barn and was trying to come up with other ideas. And she came up with another idea, and this chapter, chapter 13, is called Good Progress. Far into the night, while the other creatures slept, Charlotte worked on her web. First, she ripped out a few of the orb lines, the ones near the center. She left the radial lines alone as they were needed for support, and as she worked and worked, her 8 legs were a great help to her, and so were her teeth. She loved to weave, and she was very good at it. In fact, she was an expert. When she was finishing ripping things out, her web looked something like this. See the web with all the center lines taken out. Now, a spider can produce several kinds of thread. She uses dry, rough thread for the foundation lines, and she uses sticky thread for the snare lines, the ones that catch and hold the insects. Charlotte decided to use her dry thread for writing the new message. She said, "If I write the word terrific with sticky thread, every bug that comes along will get stuck, and it will spoil the effect." Now let's see, she thought. The first letter is T. Charlotte climbed all the way up to a point at the top of the left-hand side of the web, and swinging her spinners into position, she attached her thread and then dropped down. And as she dropped, her spinning tubes went into action, and she let out a lot of thread. At the bottom, she attached the thread, and this formed the upright letter of the letter T. Charlotte was not satisfied, however, and she climbed up to the top again and made another attachment right to the first, just to the right of the first, and then she carried the line down so that she had a double line instead of just a single line. She thought, it will show up better if I make the whole thing with double lines. So she climbed back up and moved over about an inch to the left, and she attached her spinnaker lines to the web, and then she carried the line across to the right, forming the top of the T. She repeated this, making it a double line, and her 8 legs were now very busy helping her make the letters. Now for the E, thought Charlotte. She got so interested in her work, she began to talk to herself, kind of like cheering herself on. If you had been sitting quietly in the barn cellar that evening, you may have heard something like this. Now for the R. Up we go, attach, descend. Pay out the line. Whoa, attach, good. Now, up you go, repeat, attach, descend, pay out the line. Whoa, girl. Steady now, attach, climb, attach, over to the right, pay out the line, attach now, right, now, down, now, swing, now, loop, now, around, and around, and around, and now into the left, and attach and climb. It almost became a sing-song as she continued to talk to herself. Easy now, keep those lines together, she said. Now then, up for the leg of the R, play out the line. Whoa, attach, descend, repeat, good girl, and so on, talking to herself as she went. The spider worked her difficult task. When it was completed, she felt very hungry, so she ate a small bug that she had been saving, and then she slept. And the next morning, Wilbur got up and stood beneath the web. He breathed in the morning air in his lungs. Drops of dew were catching in the sun, and it made the web stand out very clearly. When Louvie arrived with the breakfast, there was the handsome pig, and over him, woven neatly in block letters, was the word Terrific. Another miracle! Louvie ran and called Mr. Zuckerman, and Mr. Zuckerman rushed away to call Mrs. Zuckerman, and Mrs. Zuckerman ran to the phone and called the Arbles, and the Arbles climbed into their truck, and they all came over to the Zuckerman farm. Look at this. There is Wilbur, and right over top of him is a web that says Terrific. Everybody just stood there at the pig pen and watched and stared at the web. They read the word over and over. Wilbur, who really felt terrific now, stood quietly, swelling out his chest and swinging his snout from side to side. Terrific, breathed Zuckerman in joyful admiration. Edith, go call that reporter on the phone, the one at the Weekly Chronicle. Tell him what's happened. He'll want to know about this. He may even want to bring a photographer to take a picture. There isn't a pig in the whole state that is as terrific as our pig. News spread, and people who had journeyed to see Wilbur when he was some pig came back again to see him now that he was terrific. That afternoon, when Mr. Zuckerman went to milk the cows and clean out the tie-ups, he was still thinking about what a wondrous pig he owned. Louvy, he called, there's to be no more cow manure thrown down into that pig pen. I have a terrific pig. I want that terrific pig to have a clean, bright straw every day for his bedding. You understand? Yes, sir, said Louvy. Furthermore, said Zuckerman, I want you to start building a crate for Wilbur. I've decided to take that pig to the county fair on September 6th. Make the crate large and paint it green with gold letters. Gold letters, said Louvy. What do you want it to say? It should say, Zuckerman's Famous Pig. Louvy picked up a pitchfork and walked away to get some clean straw. Having such an important pig around the barn was going to mean plenty of extra work for Louvy. He could see that. Below the apple orchard at the end of the path, there was a dump where Mr. Zuckerman threw all sorts of leftover things. Things nobody wanted anymore. Here, in a small clearing hidden by the adders and wild raspberry bushes, was an astonishing pile of old bottles, empty tin cans, dirty rags, bits of metal, and broken bottles, and broken hinges, and broken springs, and dead batteries, and last month's magazines, and old discarded dish mops, and tattered overalls, and rusty spikes, and leaky pails, and forgotten stoppers, and useless kinds of junk of all kinds, including a wrong-sized crank for a broken ice cream freezer. Templeton knew the dump well, and he liked it. There was good hiding places there, excellent cover for a rat. There were usually tin cans with some food still clinging to the inside, and Templeton was down there now. He was rummaging around, and when he returned to the barn, he carried in his mouth an advertisement that he had torn from a crumpled up magazine. How's this? He asked, showing the ad to Charlotte. It says Crunchy. Would Crunchy be a good word to write in your web? Wrong idea, Charlotte said as she shook her head from side to side. Couldn't be worse. We don't want Zuckerman thinking about Wilbur as Crunchy. You see, humans might start thinking about crunchy bacon. And we don't want him thinking about tasty bacon and ham. That would put ideas into his head, and we need to advertise Wilbur's noble qualities, not his tastiness. So please, Templeton, could you go get me another word? The rat looked disgusted, but he sneaked away to the dump and was back in a while with a strip of cotton cloth. How's this? He asked. It's a label off an old shirt. Charlotte examined the label, and it said, pre-shrunk. I'm sorry, Templeton, she said, but pre-shrunk is out of the question. We want Zuckerman to think Wilbur is nicely filled out, not shrunken up. I'll have to ask you to try again. What do you think I am, a messenger boy? Grumbled the rat. I'm not going to spend all my time chasing down to the dump after advertising material. Please, said Charlotte, just one more piece, please. Tell you what I'll do, said Templeton. I know where there's a package of soap flakes in the woodshed. It has writing on it, and I'll bring you a piece of that package. He climbed the rope that hung on the wall and disappeared through the hole in the ceiling. And when he had come back, he had a strip of blue and white cardboard in his teeth. There, he said triumphantly. How's that? Charlotte read the words. With new radiant action. What does it mean? Asked Charlotte, who had never seen soap flakes before in her life. How should I know? Said Templeton. You asked for words. I brought you words. I suppose the next thing you'll want is me to fetch a dictionary, too. Together they studied the soap ad. New radiant action, repeated Charlotte slowly. Wilbur, she called. Wilbur, who was sound asleep in the straw, jumped up. Run around, said Charlotte. I want to see you in action. See if you're radiant. Wilbur raced from one end of his yard to the other. Go back again. Go faster, said Charlotte. Wilbur galloped back and forth. His skin shone. His tail had a fine, tight curl to it. Jump into the air, said Charlotte. Wilbur jumped as high as he could. Keep your knees straighter. Touch the ground. Touch the ground with your ears, said Charlotte. Wilbur obeyed and did exactly as Charlotte had told him to do. Do a backflip with a half twist to it, cried Charlotte. Wilbur went over backward, writhing and twisting as he went. It wasn't much of a backflip, but it was over. Okay, Wilbur, said Charlotte, you can go back to sleep now. Here's a picture of the Wilbur in action, jumping and trying to be radiant. You can go back to sleep now, said Charlotte. Templeton, the soap ad will do, I guess. I'm not sure exactly that Wilbur's action is very radiant, but it is interesting. Actually, said Wilbur, I feel radiant. Do you? Said Charlotte, looking at him with affection. Well, you are a good pig, and radiant you shall be. I'm in this thing pretty deep now, and I guess I might as well see it to the limit. Tired from his romp, Wilbur lay down in the clean straw, and he closed his eyes, and the straw seemed scratchy. It wasn't as comfortable as the cow manure that he was used to. The manure seemed to be delightfully soft to lie in. So he pushed some of the straw to one side, stretched out on the manure, and he sighed. It had been a busy day. His first day as a terrific pig. Dozens of people had visited his yard during the afternoon, and he had had to stand and pose and look as terrific as he knew how to look. He was tired. Fern had arrived and seated herself quietly on her stool in the corner of the sheep pen. Tell me a story, Charlotte, said Wilbur as he lay waiting for sleep to come. Tell me a story, please. So Charlotte, although she too was tired, did what Wilbur wanted. Once upon a time, she began, I had a beautiful cousin who managed to build her web across a small stream. One day a tiny fish leapt into the air and got tangled in the web. My cousin was very much surprised, of course. The fish was thrashing about wildly, and my cousin hardly dared to tackle it, but she did. She swooped down and threw her great masses of wrapping material around the fish and fought bravely to capture it. Did she succeed? Said Wilbur. It was never to be forgotten battle, said Charlotte. There was this fish, caught only by one fin, and its tail wildly thrashing and shining in the sun, and there was the web sagging dangerously under the weight of the fish. And how much did the fish weigh? Said Charlotte. Asked Wilbur. I don't really know, said Charlotte. There was my cousin, slipping in and out, dodging, being beaten mercilessly over the head by the wildly thrashing fish, dancing in, dancing out, throwing her threads, fighting hard. First she threw a left around the tail, then the fish lashed back, and then a left around the tail to the right and to the midsection, and the fish lashed back. Then she dodged to one side and threw a right and threw another to the fin, and another hard left to the head, and while the web swayed and stretched. Then what happened? Then what happened? Said Wilbur. He was so into the story. Nothing, said Charlotte. The fish lost the fight. My cousin wrapped it up tight and it couldn't budge. What happened? Asked Wilbur. Nothing, said Charlotte. My cousin kept the fish for a while, and then when she got good and ready, she ate it. Tell me another story, begged Wilbur, please. So Charlotte told him another story about a cousin of hers who was an aeronaut. What's an aeronaut? Said Wilbur. A balloonist, said Charlotte. My cousin used to stand on her head and let out so much thread to form a balloon, and then she'd let go and be lifted up into the air and carried upward, upward, upward into the warm wind. Is that true? Said Wilbur. Are you just making it up? It's true, said Charlotte. I have some very remarkable cousins. And now, Wilbur, it's time for you to go to sleep. Sing me a song, please, begged Wilbur, closing his eyes. Charlotte sang a lullaby while crickets chirped in the grass and the barn grew dark, and this was the song that she sang. Sleep, sleep, my love, my only, deep, deep in the dung and the dark. Be not afraid, be not lonely, this is the hour when the frogs and the thrushes praise the world from the woods to the rushes. Rest from care, my one and only, deep in the dung and the dark. Wilbur was already asleep. By the time the song had ended, Fern got up and went home. The next day was Saturday, and Fern stood at the kitchen sink, drying the breakfast dishes. Her mother was washing them. Mrs. Arbell worked silently. She hoped that Fern would go out and play with the other children instead of heading to the Zuckerman's barn to sit and watch the animals. Charlotte is the best storyteller I ever heard, remarked Fern, poking her dish towel into a cereal bowl. Fern, said her mother sternly, please don't invent things. You know that spiders can't tell stories. Spiders can't talk. Well, Charlotte can, said Fern. She doesn't talk very loudly, but she talks. What kind of a story did she tell? Asked her mother. Well, began Fern, she told us about a cousin of hers who caught a fish in her web. Don't you think that's fascinating? Fern, dear, how could a fish get caught in a web? Fish swim in water and spiders are not in the water. Mrs. Arbell said, you know it couldn't happen. You're just making up stories. Oh, it happened, said Fern. Charlotte never fibs. This cousin of hers built this web across this little stream, and one day she was hanging around on the web and a tiny fish leaped into the air and got tangled in the web, and the fish was caught by one fin. Mother, its tail was wildly thrashing and shining in the sun. Can't you just see the web sagging dangerously under the weight of the fish? Charlotte's cousin kept her slipping in and out and dodging out, and she was beaten mercilessly over the head by the wildly thrashing fish and dancing in the sun and dancing in and out and throwing the lines. Fern, snapped her mother, stop it. Stop inventing wild tales. I'm not inventing, said Fern. I'm just telling you the facts as Charlotte told them to me. What finally happened? Asked her mother, whose curiosity had now gotten the best of her. Well, Charlotte's cousin won. She wrapped the fish up, and then she ate him when she got good and ready. Spiders have to eat too, same as the rest of us. I suppose that's true. They do, said Mrs. Arbell. Charlotte has another cousin who's a balloonist. She stands on her head and lets out a lot of line and is carried away off into the wind. Mother, wouldn't you simply love to do that, to go up into the air? Mrs. Arbell thought a minute, and then she said, come to think of it, yes, I would. I would love to go up in a balloon one day, said Mrs. Arbell. But Fern, darling, I wish you would play outdoors instead of going to Uncle Homer's barn. Find some of your playmates and do something nice outdoors. You're spending way too much time in that barn. It isn't good for you to be alone so much. Alone? Said Fern. Alone? My best friends are at the barn cellar. It's a very sociable place, not at all lonely. Fern disappeared after a while, walking down the road to Zuckerman's barn. Her mother dusted the sitting room, and as she worked this, she kept thinking about Fern. It just didn't seem natural to have a little girl spending so much time and being so interested in animals. Finally, Mrs. Arbell made up her mind that she would pay a call on Dr. Dorian and ask him for his advice. She got in the car and drove to his office in the village. Dr. Dorian had a thick beard, and he was glad to see Mrs. Arbell and gave her a comfortable chair. It's about Fern, began Mrs. Arbell. Fern spends entirely too much time at Zuckerman's barn. It just doesn't seem normal. She sits on a milk stool in the corner of the barn cellar down in the sheep pen, looking over into the pig pen, and she watches the animals. Hour after hour she sits, and she listens. Dr. Dorian leaned back and closed his eyes. How enchanting, he said. It must be real nice down there at the Zuckerman's barn. I bet it's quiet down there. Homer has some sheep, doesn't he? Yes, he does, said Mrs. Arbell. It all started with that pig that we let Fern raise on a bottle. She calls him Wilbur. Homer bought the pig, and ever since it left our place, Fern has been going to her uncle's so she can be near that pig. I've been hearing all kinds of things about that pig, said Dr. Dorian, opening his eyes. They say he's quite a pig. Have you heard about the words that appeared in the spider's web?" asked Mrs. Arable nervously. "Yes, yes, I have," replied the doctor. "Do you understand it?" asked Mrs. Arable. "Understand what?" asked the doctor. "Do you understand how there could be any writing in a spider's web?" "No," said Dr. Dorian. "I don't understand it. But for that matter, I don't understand how a spider learned to spin a web in the first place." When the words appeared, everyone said there was a miracle. Nobody pointed out the web itself is a miracle. "What's miraculous about a spider's web?" said Mrs. Arable. "I don't see why you say the web's a miracle. It's just a web." "Ever tried to spin a web?" asked Mr. Dorian. Mrs. Arable shifted uneasily in her chair. "No," she said, I haven't. I can crochet a doily. I can knit a sock." Sure, said the doctor. "But somebody taught you, didn't they?" Here's a picture of Mrs. Arable talking to Dr. Dorian as they sit in his office. "Well," said Mrs. Arable, "my mother taught me." "Who taught the spider?" "A young spider knows how to spin a web without any instructions from anybody." "Don't you think that's a miracle?" said Dr. Dorian. "I suppose so," said Mrs. Arable. I never looked at it that way before. Still, I don't understand how those words got in the web. The words. I don't understand it, and I don't like what I don't understand." Dr. Dorian said, "None of us like what we don't understand." "I'm a doctor. Doctors are supposed to understand everything. And I understand lots of things, but I don't understand everything. I don't intend to let it worry me, however." Mrs. Arable fidgeted a little. "Fern says the animals talk to each other. Dr. Dorian, do you believe animals talk?" "Well, I never heard an animal say anything," he replied, "but that proves nothing. It's quite possible that an animal has spoken civilly to me and I didn't catch the remark because I wasn't paying attention. Children pay better attention than grown-ups, and if Fern says that the animals in Zuckerman's barn talk, I'm pretty inclined to just go ahead and agree with her. Perhaps if people talked less, animals would talk more. People are incessant talkers, don't you think? I can give you my word that I believe that's true." "Well, I feel better about Fern," said Mrs. Arable. "You don't think I need to worry about her?" "Well, does she look well?" asked the doctor. "Yes, she does." "Appetite good?" "Yes. Yes, she's always hungry." "Sleep well at night?" Yes, she does." "Then don't worry," said the doctor. "Do you think she'll ever start thinking about something besides pig and sheep and geese and spiders?" "How old is Fern?" "Well, she's 8. "Well," said Dr. Dorian, "I think she will always love animals, but I doubt that she spends her entire life in Homer Zuckerman's barn cellar. How about boys? Does she know any boys?" "Well, she knows Henry Fussy," said Mrs. Arable brightly. Dr. Dorian closed his eyes again and went into a deep thought. "Henry Fussy," he murmured. Remarkable. Well, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Let Fern associate with her friends in the barn if she wants to. I would say offhand that spiders and pigs are awfully interesting. Maybe as interesting as Henry Fussy, anyway. But I predict that the day will come when even Henry will drop some chance remark that catches Fern's attention. It's amazing how children change from year to year. "How's Avery?" he asked, opening his eyes wide. "Oh, Avery," chuckled Mrs. Arable. "Avery is always fine. Of course, he gets into poison ivy, he gets stung by wasps, he gets stung by bees, he brings frogs and snakes home, he breaks everything he lays his hands on. That boy is a disaster. He's fine." "Good," said the doctor. Mrs. Arable said goodbye and thanked Dr. Dorian very much for his advice. She felt muchly relieved. Well, that's the end of that chapter, and we're ready for chapter 15 next time we start reading. And I hope that you kids are enjoying the story of Charlotte's Web. Grandpa loves you. It's my opportunity, because it's Friday, to tell you to go to church and Sunday school on Sunday, and please behave yourselves. Do something good for someone around you. Grandpa loves you. Bye.